Karen and Richard missed so many milestones of development as a result of being under their mother's thumb for so long.
The Carpenter home, first of all, was in a fairly modest upper middle class neighborhood in Downey. But, they had the means to move to Beverly Hills or anywhere. And instead what they did was they built, I think it looked like they put 2 or 3 houses together, because the house was as long as a motel. And it was just stunningly out of place. But I loved it, that they wanted to keep their roots there. That was part of I know they're from New England, but it's almost like a Midwestern mentality. And being from the Midwest originally, I know what that is. They didn't want to look like they were too important.
The parents were very reserved. They were polite. They were gracious hosts, but they were very reserved.
They were real small town kind of American family folk. And but they were going to Beverly Hills bashes and jetting here and there and mixing with people with really, really different lifestyles than the ones that, they were, trying to lead. And anytime Karen strayed from the program, she, felt the repercussions. Not in an obvious way, but in a passive-aggressive way that guarded women and protected women like Agnes and backed by her husband Harold were good at. It was an archetype. Now we would laugh at it. It's such an old-fashioned way of conducting yourself. But the woman had pride, and pride in her family. And so she was loath to let anybody mess with that, including Karen. They were kind of like the couple from American Gothic, the way and now I look that way too. Age will do that to you. But they were warm, but they had no reason to trust me with their innermost secrets. I knew that. They kind of stepped me through the facts and how they, what the things that happened, but not the feelings they felt or the answers that they were still begging for. So I would say I felt like I'd flunked my first interview.
But they allowed us access to the whole house. I mean, Karen's room, it was important to me to see as much of her life as I could. Her room was still the way it had been when she lived in it. It was meticulous. There was not a thing out of place, and all of her stuffed animals. She was very famous for her stuffed animal collection. They were all on the bed, and at the time, as a young woman who didn't have children yet, I thought it was so strange. It looked like they were waiting for her to come back. And now, as the parent of 3 kids, I can only imagine the level of grief that you would save every little thing to keep her as alive as you can. It's very sad.
But our talk was like it was with Richard's. Everybody sat up straight, and tea and coffee and cookies, and on my notepad. And I knew I couldn't go straight to the heart of any of this. I had to find a way to see if they might like me, So we talked about a lot of mundane things. And then ultimately I had to, begin to try to pry the lid off of what they were willing to talk about. And I knew that they were she hadn't been gone that long, 1.5 years or so. And I knew that this family was still grieving and would be protective of her and themselves. But the fact that they seemed to just have no answers and to be as mystified as I was seemed odd, that you would know something about your daughter. But pulling information out of Agnes was difficult, but Harold was pretty much mute through most. He came an hour and a half into the interview with Agnes, and and more or less listened and answered a few things with yes or no. But then I got to go kind of on the road, so to speak, with people like Herb Alpert and, people that were just, idols of my own. And then I started getting the stories about who Karen was as that little lost girl, who just wanted to be loved.
If you think about it, they were 25 and 27 years old, respectively, when they finally moved out. And they didn't even really move out. They had to kind of finagle a way to make it okay that they bought Agnes and Harold a house and moved them into it to try to at least separate. And they missed so many milestones in their development as a result of being under the thumb of Agnes.
We've got generational issues that play into this whole thing too. The 50s were very different from the 60s. And that was a generation that Harold and Agnes sort of came out of, had a family, raised them in the turbulent 60s. And then by the 70s, their world had changed right before them. And that was a world that their son and daughter were going out and into. But despite all the beginnings of feminism and all of that, Karen's options were really limited. She couldn't express herself in a individualistic way. She was told to or made to or wanted to, I don't know, all of the above, dress very conservatively. I mean, there was nothing that wasn't studied and planned about how she appeared in front of her audiences. But that's not who she was.
Well, I think the fact that we're talking about the 70s is so germane to it, and also that she was born into a family that was very traditional. Agnes and Harold came from a very traditional American middle-class upbringing, and you had to color in the lines. Literally everything had to stay in a box that was considered appropriate to society. So I don't know that she ever knew who she was. I don't think she was given permission to even consider who she really was. I don't know if it was ever a conscious awareness or a subconscious choice to just be what other people expected her to be.